what is being done by the Walter Rodney Foundation is so important, and that is the dispossession of memory. There are generations of young people who know nothing about Rodney. They know nothing about the liberation struggles. They know nothing about Fanon, about Cabral and others. Just simply, there is no knowledge of them. And that is something that we seriously have to contend with. The core change that has happened in capital has to be understood. I would have loved to have gone into this in more detail, but I would refer you to Michael Roberts' excellent paper recently, From Global Slump to Long Depression, in the North Star. And essentially his argument is to demonstrate and let me read this short quote, we can sum up the movement of the US rate of profit by measuring the change in the rate across different phases. He goes on to then demonstrate that there have been systematic fall in the rate of profit. And what the effect of that is that corporations then need to find some way of accumulation by dispossession. So the huge land grabbing that is happening, the huge amputation of natural resources, let's be clear, let's not call it extraction of the extractive industries. If you're talking about non-renewable resources, we're talking about amputation. It's like cutting off your leg and selling it on the market, okay, because you're not going to grow it again. Okay, that's we're giving away our future. It is the corporations, in collaboration with our own hyenas, who are doing that. So the flight of money to financial and speculative sectors of the economy is really a sort of counter-tendency response to the falling rate of profit. Secondly, in the current phase of imperialism, finance capital, which is really important, another aspect, the casino economy has now entered into a major part of capital and the way it functions. It has become financialized. Even those great producers of industries are now in a situation where they cannot predict what the price of food or what the price of internal commodities is going to be. So the current phase of imperialism, finance capital has become international, while the state remains a nation state. The nation state, therefore, willy-nilly must bow before the wishes of finance, for otherwise finance will leave the particular country and move elsewhere, reducing it to illiquidity and disrupting its economy. Our government, thus, are more accountable to capital than to citizens. Inevitably, there has been a massive response to this. There has been in response to the dispossessions that have taken place, there's been a huge growth in discontent. If one has a look at what has happened in Tunis, in Egypt, in Burkina Faso, and I could list 25 other countries across the continent where there have been major mobilizations, especially of young people, who will not take it any longer. So what do we do? What's to be done? I just want to pose some ideas to you, because it relates to mistakes I think we also made at independence. I'd suggest that we fail to distinguish between two forms of freedom, and I think they are as relevant today as they were then. And that is a distinction between emancipatory freedoms and what I would call license freedoms. The fundamental feature of all emancipatory struggles has always been a rather basic one. A demand so basic that it sounds almost banal to express it this way. It is the audacity of people to reclaim their humanity. Let me remind you, paraphrase what Amilcar Cabral, the Guinea-Bissau revolutionary, said. Before we were Africans, we were humans. And it is our task to reclaim that humanity. The struggle for emancipation is a struggle of a people to invent, to assert, to release, and ultimately realize their full potential as humans. And being humans, realizing their potential as social beings. Emancipatory freedoms imply the collective power of people to determine their own destiny. Emancipatory freedoms are an expression of what Lewis Gordon, who spoke here a few years ago, characterizes as an historical aspiration, one that continues to exist and transcends the constraints that might have been run in any given historical period. Emancipatory freedom implies, therefore, an assertion of dignity, of self-worth, a commitment to a project that transcends frequently even the threat or possibility of death, a proclamation and assertion of an insistence upon a claim to be part of humanity. This is in contrast to what I would call license freedom. Cattle in a field can wander around. They're free to wander around wherever they like within the field. But there is no question of breaching the parameters of that field. There is no question of challenging the power of the farmer to set the parameters of that. And I regret to say that much of what we have done in the period since independence has actually been focused around begging rather than claiming our own humanity. Let me just illustrate it from a quote by Naomi Klein just recently. She says, "For 2 years, Oxfam International has traveled to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, to make requests. Could the super rich kindly cease devouring the world's wealth? And while they're at it, could they quit using their, quote, their financial might to influence public policies that favor the rich at the expense of everyone else?" In 2014, when Oxfam arrived in Davos, it came bearing the then shocking news that just 85 individuals controlled much wealth as half the world's population combined. This January, that number went down to 80 individuals. Dropping this news in Davos is a great publicity stunt. But as a political strategy, it's somewhat baffling. Why would the victors of a class war choose to surrender simply because the news is out that they have well and truly won? Oxfam's answer is that the rich must battle inequality or they will find themselves in a stagnant economy with no one to buy their products. Quote, Davos thought bubble. Isn't that what cheap credit is about? Still, even if some of the elite hand-wringing about inequality is genuine, are reports really the most powerful weapons out there to fight or for a more just distribution of wealth? Where are the sit-down strikes? Where are the mass boycotts? Where are the calls for expropriation? Where, in short, are the angry masses? For saviors, for this is indeed a world where we live dominated not only by international capital, but by the white savior industrial complex. Because for saviors to exist, there must be those in need of saving. Put in another way, saviors require victims. Victimization, that is the process of making other human beings victims, is necessarily a fundamental requirement for there to be a savior complex. And by definition, white savior complex is premised on the victimization of the African, the black body. Thus, it has become conventional in the West to describe Africans only in terms of what they are not. They are considered chaotic, not ordered, traditional, not modern, tribal, not democratic, corrupt, not honest, underdeveloped, not developed, irrational, not rational, and lacking in all those things that the West presumes itself to be. White Westerners are still today represented as the bearers of civilization, the brokers and arbiters of development, while black post-colonial others are still seen as uncivilized and unenlightened, destined to be development's exclusive objects. But to fulfill this image of Africa requires the complicity not only of the African state, but also African NGOs, each to carry out its own form of violence. First, it requires the violence associated with destroying the emergence of self-worth, self-determination, and dignity that was the achievement of the short-lived revolution that we saw in Burkina Faso, led by Thomas Sankara. That violence is also necessary if new rulers are to use the state as a source of private accumulation by dispossession for the benefit of the few. The local NGOs, whose survival is dependent on receiving handouts from the white savior complex, are complicit in nurturing the image of the subservient, incapable, primitive African, the victim that needs saving. The complicity of African NGOs, and indeed of our African leaders, in perpetuating a form of self-hate of the African identity, a modern manifestation of black skin's white mask of Fanon, is a painful and too often unacknowledged form of violence. Saviors cannot thrive where a people retake control of their destinies, assert their dignity and humanity, and create the structures for self-determination. Organize to produce and make collective decisions, take pride in their own cultures, and seek their neither aid, grants, nor charity. Let's emancipate ourselves. Let us free ourselves. I think that's the agenda, the lesson that I would put forward to you. Thank you.
Profound words indeed. Thanks to all our speakers. I think I will now invite our the remaining speakers, those who are still remaining in the room. Farouz, maybe you can join us back up here, along with Fatma, Chitro. If there are, hopefully we can have some open dialogue with members of the audience. You can please stand up.